Thank you, Anatoly. And I thank those who are here to listen to this presentation and for this afternoon session. The purpose of my presentation is talk about a very interesting molecule, interesting element that has been of interest both clinically and in terms of research for almost now 60 years. My particular focus will be to talk about stem cells as it relates to lithium, but just allow me to spend a few minutes to talk about background. So why lithium? Well, life begins with lithium, if you did not know it. It's the smallest and lightest solid element. It has unusual clinical, pharmacological, biochemical properties. Cannot be patented, and you'll see the reasons why in terms of the alternative other medical uses. Cheap to produce, and it exists in terms of its clinical application as a monovalent cation, as a salt. It was discovered in Sweden in 1817, named following the Greek for lithos, was first isolated in appreciable quantities in 1855. It has, in addition to medicinal uses that I'll outline shortly, but it also has a wide use within commercialization in industry because as a single monovalent cation, chemically it appears to be able to make anything that it's added to stronger, more resilient in terms of its application to metal alloys in the manufacture of glass. It's used as a lubricant, lithium grease. It's used in the construction industries, and of course we're all familiar with electrical batteries. It's also the key element. Those of you who fly and use airplanes as a mode of transportation, and you're sitting on the tarmac waiting for your flight to leave, but they say, no, we must de-ice the plane. Yes, you've all de-iced the plane. They are using lithium. Lithium allows that de-icing material to stick and stay to the airplane fuselage. So if nothing else that you remember from this talk, perhaps that would be most useful. So 1% of its use is in clinical medicine. Its use in clinical medicine is highlighted now. We're approaching in 2018, 60 years with respect to its use in psychiatry as the treatment of choice for treating bipolar manic depressive illness. There were some other interesting associations with its use early on, but its main clinical application is in psychiatry, and it was actually the very first drug approved by the FDA back in the early 70s. It's had a long history. It's not all been positive with respect to some unwanted side effects that were demonstrated due to poor application that redefined its use clinically, but the elegant and true-to-force studies by Mogens Sekskov and Sam Gershon Monskow in Denmark and Samuel Gershon in the United States redefined its use in psychiatry for bipolar disorder. It's been proven safe and effective for bipolar illness and depression. Studies done in Sweden demonstrated its efficacy in terms of its ability to prevent suicide. And in the United States, the National Institute of Mental Health did a study that demonstrated that the use of lithium in psychiatry for manic depressive bipolar illness saved the United States economy up to $4 billion with respect to treatment. Lithium, if it's administered, is widely disseminated in the body, and it can accumulate in a variety of tissues. Whether or not lithium should be classified as a trace element has been debate over the years. Because it exists in widespread ubiquitously in the environment, whether it be in the groundwater, in soils, and therefore in foods. It was only until the studies done by Manfred Anker demonstrated if there was a deficiency created via experimental conditions that the results of the deficiencies of lithium done under experimental conditions in the variety of animal species. And he studied goats, cows, and chickens, demonstrated that if lithium then was completely devoid, being totally eliminated from the diet and also through fluid intake, that there was the observation in terms of change in reproduction. Both the conception rate was reduced, spontaneous abortions were experienced. So, based on Anker's pioneering studies, it confirmed that at least it should be considered as a trace element. And it is something in terms of its clinical use and its effectiveness in psychiatry that it's allowed us to look at some alternative non-psychiatric uses, since this particular substance is found so widely in nature. Its use in psychiatry in terms of its role to treat manic depressive bipolar illness. In patients receiving lithium, there was the reported side effect that patients on lithium increased their white blood cell count. There was an induction of a leukocytosis. So this led to investigations basically to answer the question, why would a single monovalent cation be able to stimulate or increase the production in terms of a neutrophilia, a leukocytosis? So studies were done back in the 1980s when I was a fellow in New York, and this was my project to try to determine, since we were very concerned at that time studying what was the individual effect of monovalent cations on blood cell production. This was the project that I was assigned, and we demonstrated as a course to then look at whether or not there was effect on stem cells. And this is data that was published in Blood back in 1980, where we demonstrated that lithium administered in an animal model system in a dose-response effect increased the number of pluripotential hematopoietic cells. This is the bioassay originally discovered that identified the existence of the hematopoietic stem cell, classical experiments done by James Till and Ernst McCullough. So this was the first indication that lithium can influence stem cells, stem cell proliferation, which could then explain why in patients there was an increase in white blood cell count, because lithium was stimulating the pluripotential hematopoietic stem cell. The stem cell that is analogous in humans is the CD34 positive, 33 negative cell, and many, many studies. This has been the topic of many reviews, several books, lots of reports in the literature. So questions having to do, well, if it was effective in animal model systems, what about in humans? And studies have demonstrated that, yes, the similar phenomenon is seen in a variety of species, dogs, and as well here reported by studies where the CD34 positive, which is the human equivalent of the CFUS demonstrated in the previous slide, so that it also was an effect seen in humans. For many years, lithium was looked at because of the side effects associated with cancer chemotherapy and or radiation therapy, where patients, the dose-limiting feature of those modalities is a neutropenia and thrombocytopenia. There was quite an effort during that time period that the NCI considered using lithium as a means by which in myelodysplastic and cancer patients receiving myeloablative therapy, could you then reduce the myelotoxicity seen in those patients following either chemo or radiation therapy. And so studies have demonstrated that lithium then protects the stem cell from the toxicity associated with those cancer treatment modalities. So there's a number of different cellular effects, and cellular effects are also added to those effects that are involved in the whole sort of cytokine network, whereas if you know this subject or know this area, it's a very complicated hierarchy of cell interaction, multitude of growth factors, cytokines, interleukins that all have an interplay. And so there are listed here a number of different reported effects of lithium modulating a long list of modulatory cytokines that affect both blood cell production, lymphocyte activation, etc. In addition to stimulating or increasing the production of certain cytokines, it can also have an inhibitory effect that many of these molecules work in a cyclic pattern where some molecules are stimulated while others are inhibited. Again, pointing to the unique characteristic nature as a single monovalent cation. Can influence antibody production. It can influence response that B cells have to particular mitogens. And it can reportedly change the ratio of helper T cells versus cytotoxic T cells. And it can increase the response of the cells of the immune and reticular endothelial system in response to mitogens, the lymphocyte reaction, et cetera. Can increase NK activity, again, probably dealing with the fact that it has this initial reaction on precursor and pluripotential stem cells. Because there are activities related to responses like viral infections, other types of microbial, bacterial infections, studies demonstrated that lithium also had an antiviral effect. This is somewhat a serendipitous finding that in many instances where patients who are diagnosed with manic depressive bipolar illness, and actually many of these individuals who are celebrities that are in that walk of life who have had reports when they've been asked about their lithium response. And one famous actress, Patty Duke, who suffers from bipolar manic depressive illness, when she was writing her autobiography and she was asked to comment about how she's been able to survive with lithium, she said, you know, one of the other things that I've noticed, I never catch a cold. And there's been studies to demonstrate that lithium has antiviral action. So this is an example of the hematopoietic tree. It's the complexity in terms of the pluripotential stem cell at the top and the various lineages, the lymphoid lineage on the right, and all of the myeloid, the erythroid, the thrombocytic, and the granulocytic cells. All of those cells in the pathways can be influenced by lithium. Blood cell effects, again, this indicates that there are direct action on these cells as well as through the mediators that are the cytokines, the colony-stimulating factors, whether the action is stimulatory versus an inhibitor. Again, this is a complex slide just to demonstrate the complexity based on the fact that lithium can influence in terms of the activation of the cells that are responsible for the secretion, synthesis and secretion of these growth factors and cytokines. Still, to this day, trying to determine precisely the mechanism of action. We know that there is activity at the signal transduction level through a variety of different pathways with respect to lithium's ability to cross the blood-brain barrier and have activity at the single cell and within the cytosol as well as the nucleus. So some of the enzymes that have been targeted, inositol, monophosphatase, et cetera, the others listed here. Again, also trying to determine what indeed is the specific mechanism of action and why it's so effective in clinically defined manic depressive bipolar illness. One of the key targeted effects that has been come to light in the past several years that's now leading lithium in a different direction is the effect that lithium is one of the most effective inhibitors of glycogen synthetase kinase, GSK3 beta. And this particular enzyme and its biological function and a pathogenesis is being keyed to a number of different ailments, including dementia and Alzheimer's disease, since it's the action of GSK3 beta that's upregulated in the deposition of either tau protein or beta plaques in the brain. Lithium inhibits the action of that enzyme. So this was tested in a variety of systems, tested in an animal model, and simply to mention to you that anything that is stress-inducing can be a sufficient stimulus to turn on GSK3 beta to initiate the biochemical pathways that can lead to increased hyperphosphorylation of tau protein and/or plaque determination, which are the initial pathogenesis for dementia and Alzheimer's disease. So something as similar as stress is sufficient enough to be able to initiate that biochemical reaction. Lithium inhibits that action of GSK3 beta. Pharmaceutical companies have, because as I mentioned, you saw one of the early slides, lithium cannot be patented. Many pharmaceutical companies are still searching to try to find effective new drugs, chemicals that have the effectiveness of inhibiting GSK3 beta as lithium does. So this was just some studies that we performed in the lab where we basically starved animals and gave them lithium with or without starvation and looked at the induction of GSK3 beta. This just shows that after starvation, you can increase the level of GSK3 beta, but if the animals are pre-treated with lithium, that activation is decreased. And that can be seen in young mice versus aged mice. So the effectiveness in terms of the GSK synthesis and induction is actually more acute in aged animals than is in young animals. And so this is studies that have been reported to show that indeed that effect is mediated by inhibiting GSK3 beta. And what's interesting is that the concentrations that one sees in terms of systemic blood levels, the action still is within the ranges by which the doses are used clinically in psychiatry. So this has basically opened up a whole area for lithium investigation, now dealing with neurological related conditions. So lithium has currently been studied, in some cases very effectively, in patients with stroke, Huntington's disease, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, retinal degeneration, spinal cord injury, the dementia associated with HIV, and even in wound healing. So a study was published in the British Journal of Psychiatry that showed that bipolar patients who were greater than 60 years of age had a higher incidence of developing Alzheimer's, but if the patients received lithium because of their bipolar, that rate was significantly decreased, as well as other studies that have confirmed that finding. Again, mechanism believed to be concentrated on its ability to inhibit GSK3 beta. Alzheimer's disease, similar in terms of the pharmacological effect, and that is basically that a simple salt that is used in psychiatry, usually in the form of lithium carbonate, can be an effective agent to at least minimize the effects in these debilitating diseases, which are growing at an alarming rate as the world population ages. So there may be a readily affordable, economic way to treat these patients that are increasing as we see. There's also a neuroprotective effect associated with lithium, and that it's believed because of its ability to prevent apoptosis in neurons through a number of different mechanisms. And this is, again, something that's being further studied, which I'll point out shortly. But it also appears to be able to upregulate the anti-apoptotic BCL2 gene and downregulates those genes that regulate apoptosis. So chronic lithium treatment can protect neurons, and its ability then biochemically seems to be very effective. Huntington's disease is another condition, neurological condition, that apparently there would be efficacy for lithium in these particular patients as well because of its ability to minimize the neurological detriment associated with Huntington's disease. Probably one of the most intriguing areas, and one is really under active clinical investigation, is the relationship or the utility of lithium in spinal cord disease. Spinal cord disease, in terms of especially dysfunction, has been often prescribed as the ailments that were suffered by the actor Christopher Reeve, where he had spinal cord, suffered an accident, and his degree of his spinal cord injury resulted in complete paralysis. Oftentimes it was explained that, well, the neurons will not be able to regenerate themselves, but studies now that have been pioneered by Dr. Weiss Young, who is at the New Jersey College of Medicine, has been active in this field now for a number of years, and there's a number of clinical trials currently underway that have shown great promise in the ability of utilizing lithium to accelerate the recovery, and actually the recovery with respect to regenerating damaged neurological tissues. So this is an active area of research. There's several clinical trials, and one that I'll mention to you briefly because it's still ongoing. The results, the study will close in this coming December. So there's hope that there will be a positive finding, especially if not directly with respect to the paralysis, at least also importantly in those patients, is the reduction of pain. So the clinical trial that's been orchestrated and now has been running for about 2.5 years, it will close in December 2015, is to investigate the efficacy of lithium carbonate in the treatment of neuropathic pain of patients with spinal cord injury. This trial it's a multi-center trial currently being conducted in China at several major medical centers in the country. So hopefully, once data analysis has been reviewed and is released, hopefully there will be reports of positive findings. So here are some references related to the supporting that particular work that are work by the Young Lab, where there was efficacy and safety of lithium in lithium carbonate, which is again the same formulation for lithium in psychiatry, treatment of chronic spinal cord injuries, and also evaluating the safety and pharmacokinetics when evaluated in chronic conditions where spinal cord injury has been demonstrated. Also, based on the fact that there can be an effect, as we indicated, with respect to stem cells, there's now an association with applying lithium use with respect to wound healing. Lithium works in terms of single transduction pathways through the Witten-Notch signaling system, and it can target a number of intracellular targets that may indeed show promise, in particular because of its ability also to stimulate the replication of epidermal-derived stem cells. So getting back to psychiatry, since it was still questionable how basic is lithium working, one question then that has been asked, what about the characterization of stem cells in bipolar patients versus the normal population? So more recent studies have actually demonstrated that in bipolar patients, they actually have stem cells that are defective. And the utilization now is that perhaps lithium is an effective treatment clinically as it's been used and widely disseminated for now upwards to 60 years in clinical psychiatry, that probably or possibly one of the core elements of that mechanism of action is its ability to influence stem cell and stem cell renewal and replication at the same time, targeting these specific enzymes with its specific inhibitory action. So in summary, what I've tried to convince you that is lithium is still an important, not just element, but it's an important drug in terms of its clinical efficacy in clinical medicine. There are new and exciting opportunities for lithium to be investigated, certainly in the realm of transplantation and transplantation science. We can utilize lithium in terms of in vivo stem cell expansion by adding it to aid and stimulate the production of stem cells that can be utilized for transplantation purposes with an ever-growing list of clinical ailments where stem cell treatment or stem cell therapy could be most effective. Specifically, in terms of its mechanism of action, it's multifactorial. So perhaps in terms of its ability then to be so effective in manic depressive bipolar illness, as it's been pointed out, that indeed bipolar patients may have as one of their key elements relating to their altered psychiatric state is the fact that they have a stem cell or stem cells that are defective, which can be corrected by lithium therapy. So the doses in terms of what's used in psychiatry is within the range, usually about 0.6 to 1.0 millimolar in systemic blood levels. Most, if not many of the reactions in terms of these other effects are also seen during, at the same clinical concentration. It appears to have low mutagenicity and a lack of carcinogenic risk. Even though it induces a leukocytosis, that leukocytosis is reversible. That is, the leukocytosis will secede upon the cessation of lithium treatment, and it, again, could still be an effective treatment for an ever-growing list of clinical disorders, as we're finding out. And we hope that the latest clinical trials will certainly point that out for spinal cord injury. So, again, that's an update on the topic, and hopefully, perhaps maybe next year, we'll have even more exciting news for lithium. So thank you for your attention.
Dear friends, participants, do you have some questions?
Thank you for a nice talk. I was wondering if you know the range in which this clinical trial is taking place in China on the lithium serum level. I know the psychiatry therapeutic level, but if you can have the effect at a lower lithium serum lithium level, that would even be safer for patients.
Right. I think, and certainly that's been the history in terms of the clinical course because of what's defined as a narrow therapeutic window. But clinically, that really should not be a problem based on the newer formulations that are slower release, et cetera. So it can be clinically monitored. It can be measured at the bedside. It doesn't take atomic absorption analysis in order to get serum lithium levels. The threshold level in terms of what's currently being evaluated is looking at the same effective doses as seen in psychiatry, which, as I indicated, have been well tolerated now for more than 60 years. So that seems to be a safe and comfort level for the clinicians that are currently investigating it.
Vince, I started my career about 25 years ago in medicine as a psychiatrist, but I could not stand more than 2 years. I said, it's nothing for me. It was all in a mess. But at that time, there were no SSRI, there were no antidepressants of the kind which you prescribe now. But lithium was there, one of those, and many old clinicians used it. And my question now is that, you mentioned about the dementia and the lithium interaction, Could you tell me something more, how it works? Is it reduce the plaques, or is it act on the amyloids? How lithium is going to interact with the dementia?
By inhibiting the enzyme and the activation of the enzyme, the concentration is increased, and therefore it causes, the enzyme does, of accumulation of a specific protein, the tau protein. That accumulation blocks the synapses within the brain in neural function. What lithium is able to effectively do by blocking the action of the enzyme, it reverses the upregulation in tau-induced phosphorylation of that protein, so the synapses are restored. And again, to your further point, much of the original work, especially related with respect to its effectiveness in suicide, was done in Sweden. That data was, Brigitte Nielsen in Sweden was credited with that observation and very important discovery.
does someone has measured the lithium concentration inside the cells?
In terms of the patients or in general?
In general, in normal and in patients.
Yes. Now, I mean, I can talk about this for the next, for the rest of the day, so you have to be careful with what you ask me. And lithium has been widely prescribed or widely associated, and there have been really strong advocates for its an increased efficacy and increased use versus those that are more responsive to its detractors. Now, yes, it can be measured. And partly because of its measurement, it's because its ubiquitous nature, because it's found, you know, in the groundwater, it's found in the ground, the earth, and we partake of it through our diets, through our fluid intake. So there have been reports, there have been well-documented studies. Gerhard Schrauzer, for many years, who was at the University of California in La Jolla, who was a social behaviorist. He associated that, and they would monitor and they would do calculations based on lithium levels in the drinking water in certain population areas. And they made the correlation that areas where there was a higher incidence of spousal abuse, aggressive behavior, social unrest in terms of adverse behavior, were associated with lower lithium levels in the drinking water.
No. But
we don't normally do a baseline standard.
No, I'm asking because you mentioned about the serum concentration. I'm asking if we know how much inside the cell, the cytoplasm and the nucleus, how much we need.
To be perfectly honest with you, I'm sure it's been investigated. I'm sure the values are there. Standing here, I don't know the answer to that, but I would be totally surprised if it hasn't been investigated in terms of its even intracellular and intracytosol, because it has been demonstrated that it also enters the nucleus. And it also, the focus of my presentation is based on animal cells and animal physiology. It also has a role in plants.
Just a quick question as well. Are you aware of any atomic structure of just this kinase with lithium? Because you mentioned that can regulate. The question would be where lithium is bound. Is it in the enzymatic pocket?
It's been hypothesized of its unique chemical nature because it's a single positive monovalent cation, but its atomic size and its as an element is actually resembles the size of magnesium, and so many of these enzymatic interactions. Basically, what has been demonstrated is that it effectively competes or outcompetes magnesium for the enzymatic binding site in any magnesium catalytic reaction. So part of many of the inhibitory effects, for example, with the immune cells that are catalyzed by activation via cyclic AMP, which requires magnesium for cyclic AMP enzyme, that's blocked by lithium.
Thank you.
And my last word of why it's so important, and I always will end, how many in the room are Trekkies? You know what Trekkies are? Star Trek. Who watched Star Trek? Okay. So how many are there? Raise your hands. Okay, my question is, what powered the Starship Enterprise? Shame on you. Lithium crystals.